work in events. We have enabled, and it's recording, we have enabled closed captioning, and you can disable this feature in the lower right corner. The webinar recording will be available to all registrants and we'll also post it on our YouTube site. We are going to keep everyone on mute. We encourage you to please use the chat function and the Q&A function at any time. Also, I'm going to emphasize to please use the Q&A function for questions as they come up. I'll be looking at that throughout the presentation, but please feel free to use the chat to just discuss anything you'd like with other attendees. And then finally, just an antitrust statement. Participants shall comply with competition law and requirements and all that other legal stuff. But that clears up our things to note before we get started. So we'll go to the next slide. Great. Just a little bit about NEEP before we dive into the content, and in case this is your first time seeing us. So we are NEEP, or the Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnerships. NEEP is a nonprofit organization founded in 1996, and we are actually one of 6 regional energy efficiency organizations. There's RIOs in all other parts of the US, and we actually kind of live between the states and the federal government and help to spread best practices throughout our region at both the community and the state level. Specifically at NEEP, we work to drive market transformation regionally by fostering collaboration and innovation and developing research and tools and disseminating knowledge. And we work to assist the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states to equitably and affordably reduce building sector greenhouse gas emissions in alignment with their goals. And we work, as you can see, all the way up from West Virginia to Maine. Next slide, please. Oh, yep. And these next couple of slides are just who we would like to thank for all of our work. First, we have our foundation and federal funders that are here. And next slide. And this is our allies network. Thank you all so much for being part of it. And if you would like to learn more, please feel free to shoot us a message. It's a great network where you can come to NEEP events and also get information like policy updates every week, which is what my team does. Next slide. And finally, we would like to thank our state partners that are highlighted here. And then on our final slide here, we have all of our work that we do in the region. So in case you're wondering what kind of work we do in your state or in states that you work in, it's highlighted up on this map here. Okay, great. Next slide. And with that, we will now go into our webinar and the content for today. So as you can see here, I'll be kicking us off with an introduction to our brand new resource called the Regional Roundup. It's a brand new resource, but it is a resource we've been releasing intermittently for a while now. I can't even think of when we started, but I believe this is the 5th, 6th, maybe even later iteration of the Regional Roundup. But we released this resource to kind of provide a snapshot of what's happening in our region. So I'll be previewing that. We'll then have Babatunde Idris from Empower Maryland, or the Maryland Energy Administration, talking about the Empower Maryland program. Empower Maryland just released approved plans in the fall. So we'll be hearing about those new plans and how they're integrating GHG emissions. And then we will travel over to New Jersey, where Phillip Chao, with the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities, will be talking to us about New Jersey's Triennium 2, which was also recently approved, and also was an energy efficiency program that incorporated new GHG features into it and other policies. And we'll have both of them join us. And then after our presentations, we're going to have an opportunity at the end for Q&A. So I'll encourage anyone as we go through myself, Tunde's or Phillip Chao's presentation to please put any questions you might have in the chat, and we'll be sure to get to those. Next slide, please. Great. And with that, I will kick off our webinar by introducing our new resource, the Regional Roundup, a snapshot of state success. Next slide. Great. So you all might know, many states in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic have ambitious energy efficiency goals that aim to save energy and money for homes and businesses and provide a resource for grid reliability, creating local jobs, and reducing pollutants. And so states are implementing all kinds of various policies to achieve these goals. And this resource, the Regional Roundup, which you can also look at from the link in the chat, allows for readers to compare states in the NEEP region and identify best practices in the policy space. It's a snapshot of energy efficiency and building decarb policies throughout the region. And as you can see, we have our states listed there. And then finally, I'm really excited that this is actually an expanded version of the Roundup. So the 2024 Roundup is built off a table brief that we released last year. And the table brief has kind of 4 key policy areas that we see energy policy or energy efficiency policy moving in: utility planning and regulation, codes and standards, equity in workforce, and carbon reduction obligations. And so this new version of the Roundup has separate tables for each of those policy areas, and then also includes what we're calling energy efficiency by the numbers, which is a breakdown of kind of just the numbers of efficiency programs. So how much are they spending? How is the low income spending? And what are their goals? And we're hoping this provides a nice, easy snapshot that everyone can see. Next slide. Great. And so this is an overview of what the actual regional roundup looks like. As you can see, as I indicated before, we go through each of the legs of the table and we provide a tables on tables. We provide a table of all of the recent policies that states have adopted. And the great thing is we've done our best to include links within each of those. So if you're interested or want to learn more about the policy, you can click on the hyperlink included inside the summary. And then on the right side of the screen here is what we have at the end of every single state, which is a snapshot of all of their policies operating under the legs. And it really provides a great comparison point so others can see kind of what's going on in their state and what's going on across the region. Next slide, please. Great. And I wanted to provide a preview of kind of what we're seeing happening in all of our states. So this is our regional roundup snapshot, which provides summaries of high-level policies under each leg. I think the one big takeaway that I would love everyone to, or that I wanted to share on this call, is that we don't have a policy that every single state has adopted in our region. Every state is approaching building decarbonization slightly differently, trying out innovative policies, and while some do overlap, some states are mimicking one another in certain areas, there isn't exactly one policy that we're seeing across the board. So anything is welcome in this space. Also, the one thing that is similarly or most common is just the adoption of state level codes, but those are adopted at varying degrees throughout our whole region. And as you can see there, we have 4 states plus DC with the 2021 IEC and 1 state with the 2024 IECC, and then a number of other states adopting various versions in addition to those or previous versions. Also, I think a big thing to highlight here is under utility planning and regulation. We have one of the other most common policies we see adopted in our region, which is statewide energy efficiency programs. And we'll be diving into how states are adopting and using those to achieve efficiency goals and then also to achieve emissions and GHG goals. And yeah, so I encourage others to take a look at this, but hoping this kind of just provides an overview of what we're seeing in our region. I think maybe the other thing to really call out here is codes and standards and carbon reduction obligations both include innovative policies that we're seeing. So only a couple of states have really implemented them, but we're excited to see what more states decide to adopt them. And I'm thinking here of building performance standards, zero emission appliance standards, clean heat standards, and then also cap and invest programs, which are all talked about in the regional roundup. Next slide, please. Great. And then just 2 more takeaways from the roundup I wanted to share. This first one is what we're calling the regional leaders. So these are states with the most policies, and are states that have adopted 18 or more policies that are listed out in the regional roundup. As you can see from the list, I put the total amounts in the states. There are states that have tied numbers. And as I indicated before, the 2 states might be tied, but that does not mean that they look similar once you actually drill down to what they're doing. They're all kind of approaching it very uniquely. But some common themes that we've seen from the state leaders is, one, innovation in policies and implementation strategies. So one example of this is Maryland is implementing both a zero emission appliance standard and a clean heat standard, and they're actually implementing them together under what's called a clean heat rule. And the idea is that the standard, the appliance standard, will set the long-term target for industry and manufacturers, while the clean heat standard actually helps industry itself start to transition year over year so that you kind of have a glide path for the industries and the businesses, and then you're setting the targets to help manufacturers and distributors achieve that technology by the time the clean heat standard has ramped up. Another innovative topic here is in Massachusetts, they just released their 2025 to 2027 energy efficiency plan, and it introduced a new, I want to say, first of its kind program where they're actually offering a statewide HVAC program from all utilities and then distributing the savings back to all utilities located throughout the state. It's one way that Massachusetts has also worked around the ban on natural gas incentives in their state, kind of trying to find a way where all the utilities can come together and create energy savings. And I think it's also an indication of how the coordination that we might see from utilities and energy efficiency programs as programs continue to evolve. Other themes to highlight is leadership that sets benchmarks and implements enabling legislation. So Maine has heat pump benchmarks. Massachusetts has technology benchmarks built into their plan. And then another common theme we're seeing with the leaders in this space is prioritizing equity in policy implementation. So for example, Vermont has a set aside for their clean heat standard, and then also a number of these states have equity metrics embedded within their programs. Next slide, please. Great. And then this last slide is our regional, what I'm calling movers and shakers. So who have we seen kind of really put energy efficiency policy at the forefront since our past regional roundup? And these states are Connecticut, Maryland, New Jersey, and Rhode Island. And some common themes and what we're seeing come out of these states is really leadership from state energy offices. So in a place where maybe the legislator isn't putting mandates on utility programs, these states are really taking the initiative and the forethought at the state agency level to put mandates into plans or to have utilities start to consider shifting from gas to electric. We'll be talking to New Jersey, who has come out with a building decarbonization program later in the call. We also have Rhode Island, who has Clean Heat Rhode Island, and that was started by the state agency as implemented by them. Another common theme is evolving existing energy efficiency programs, and we'll be talking about that later in this call. And then finally, these states are also advancing policies under multiple legs of the table. So we're seeing them advance carbon reduction obligations and evolving energy efficiency programs, as well as equity and workforce initiatives. And feel free to dive into the regional roundup and then also look for a blog that we'll be publishing later this month that will go into more of these themes. Next slide, please. Great. And with that, I've introduced the regional roundup. I did just want to show both New Jersey's building decarbonization table, which is in front of here. And we'll have Chao come out in a couple minutes after Babatunde from Maryland Energy Administration. But just so you can all see kind of, this is New Jersey's table. They have efficiency programs, equity and workforce, carbon reduction obligations, and codes and standards. And then for comparison, if we go to the next slide, you can see Maryland's table, which is all of the policies that Maryland is interacting. And like I said, we're really hoping that these images at the end of every regional roundup is able to have a point of comparison between the states for advocates, state energy offices, and other groups interested in what's happening in the states. And with that, I will now invite Babatunde Idris from the Maryland Energy Administration to come on and talk about the Maryland Empower program. I'll emphasize as Babatunde is speaking, please put any clarifying questions that you have for him in the chat. I'll come on and we'll see if we can go through those at the end. But with that, Babatunde, the stage is yours. Excited to hear about Maryland's work in the efficiency space.
Thank you very much, Erin. My name is Babatunde Idrisu. I work with the Maryland Energy Administration as an energy policy manager. In that role, I work primarily with transportation policy and the Empower Maryland program. Um, Next slide, please. So MEA is Maryland State Energy Office, and we try to promote clean, affordable, reliable energy, as well as energy-related greenhouse gas emission reductions to benefit Marylanders in a just and equitable manner. We advance policies and programs to help Maryland achieve its climate goals as well as its clean energy goals. Next slide, please. A little bit about the Empower program. The Empower program was launched in 2008 under the Empower Maryland Energy Efficiency Act. The initial goal of the program was to reduce per capita electricity consumption by 15% by 2015 from 2007 levels. Um, Over time, there's been legislation to expand and refine the program. After 2015, the goal was um, to reduce the energy consumption by 2% of the gross energy usage in 2006. Um, and currently, we'll talk a little bit more about the changes that have happened in the program later on. The program is operated by the major utilities, BGE, Pepco, Delmarva, Potomac Edison, and SMECO. DHCD handles more of like the limited income part of the program. Next slide, please. Um, the program is composed of like four major components. We have the residential programs, the commercial programs, demand response programs, and limited income programs. So it aims to cover different segments of the Maryland economy and try to provide solutions for energy efficiency for those different areas. Next slide, please. Yeah, so there's been a few changes to the program over the last few years. I think starting with the Climate Solutions Now Act, which was passed in 2022, which increased the targets for energy savings for the program um, gradually. Um, but since then, there's been other legislation that have been passed. In 2023, HB 169 was passed. That set targets for energy savings for DHCD, that's the Department of Housing and Community Development. Historically, DHCD had not had targets to meet, unlike the utilities, but that set energy savings targets for DHCD. Last year, HB 864 was passed, and it broadened the strategy of the program. Instead of from a purely energy efficiency program, um, it 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 evolved trying to use that to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So the program shifted from purely energy efficiency to a broad strategy that involved energy efficiency and greenhouse gas reductions. So there are new greenhouse gas goals that needs to be achieved over the next few years, and it helps us push the overall climate goals of the state towards more electrification and more greenhouse gas reduction. Next slide, please. Over the last 15 years more than 15 years that the program has been in operation, we've seen over 60 million megawatt hours of electricity saved, 3,165 megawatts electricity generation. We've seen over 73,000 limited income customers impacted, millions of metric tons of CO2 emissions avoided, and over $14.5 billion of saved over the course of installed energy efficiency measures. Next slide, please. So what are we looking at for the future? We with a focus on electrification, we do hope that we move away from incentives for fossil fuel-based appliances and move to more towards electrification and heat pumps um, and electric water heaters and things like that. Of course, this is to support the current goals of the state, the greenhouse gas goals, the energy goals, and try to create a cleaner environment for us and try to do it in a way that obviously would also carry along the lower income Marylanders in line with the state's agenda of leaving no one behind. Um, and that's why there's increased funding for lower income Marylanders, and we hope that that continues to grow and we can also continue to expand the electrification program to align with the state's ambitious climate goals, which of course I didn't mention it before, is to reduce um, greenhouse gas emissions by 60% by the year 2031 from 2006 level. So it's a pretty ambitious goal, and also to reach net zero by 2045. So the state has adopted a very ambitious goal, and we try and through Empower and other programs similar to it to try to push that goal. I think that's it for me. Um, I'm open to questions.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Does anyone have any clarifying questions for Tunde on what he mentioned? Okay, it looks like we got one question that looks like it might be more in the weeds. So with that, what I'll do is I'll invite Phil Chao and Tunde. I will call you back on when we have our discussion. Thank you.
All right. Good morning. I'm Phil Chao. I'm with the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities. I work on the EE programs. I work on EM and V, and I'm also working on demand response programs at the board. All right. Next slide. Yeah, so the board has a division of clean energy, which serves as the state's energy office. So, we look at energy planning across all the state agencies, and we run wind, solar, EV storage, as well as the energy efficiency programs. And we also have a separate Office of Clean Energy Equity that looks at, um, um, you know, making sure our programs reach our disadvantaged communities. Um, and we have a sub team that in the DCE that looks at that oversees the EE programs. So I'm part of the energy efficiency team. Next slide. All right, so our programs are divided between state-run programs and utility-run programs, and generally the state-run programs are for new construction and the utility-run programs are for existing programs. Um, and the focus today is mostly on the utility-run programs. We finished our first triennium. Our programs were all state-run up to 3.5 years ago, and now they're utility-run. So the first 3 years was completed on December 31st. It was 3.5 years long because we extended it for half a year in order to get our planning prepared for the next triennium. So Triennium 1 was 3.5 years, and Triennium 2 is only 2.5 years. So the budgets that you see there are a little bit disproportionate because of the planning horizon. But the programs have grown into Tri-2, and we've added a building decarb program, which I'll go into some detail, as well as a new demand response program. All right, next slide. We evaluate our programs using a custom social cost test, specific to Jersey. I'll point out that the social cost of carbon was set at $50 per ton in 24, and there is a inflationary factor on it. Um, I just heard talk that we're going to raise it significantly going into try three, but that's not in stone yet. Uh, I think one unique thing we had was we had non-energy benefits. There was an adder of 15%, and then there's a separate adder for low-income programs of 15% on top of that. So, we talked about more granular ways of measuring non-energy benefits and low-income benefits, but that's kind of an evolving practice for us to be more specific with those at this point in time. All right, next slide. For our framework for Triennium 2, we are mandated by law from the Clean Energy Act to have the utilities, the electric utilities hit 2% in next year, and then the gas utilities hitting 0.75% of annual savings next year as well. There's a separate electrification goal that was mandated through an executive order from the governor of electrifying 400,000 residential units, 20,000 commercial units, and providing electrification readiness for LMI. So those are done through an executive order, so it's not legislatively mandated. So that kind of raised a challenge to coordinate the utility programs to do the to do kilowatt hour savings and therm savings, but also do electrification separately. So that's a bit of a challenge because it's not fully aligned in terms of targets. And then lastly, I'll point out that the utilities have a incentive mechanism where they do get a return on equity for their expenses on running the Tri-2 programs. And that return on equity is there's a bonus on it if they hit 120% of their target, and that's the graph there, up to 50 basis points. And then if they miss their savings targets, there could be a penalty up to 4% deduction on their return on equity if they really miss their targets. Um, so that's in place. Next slide. Here's the general structure of the programs. There's, we have all these three different sectors: residential, multifamily, commercial. For residential, there's whole home. There's an income qualified whole home program. Then there's energy efficient products, and then a behavioral program, which is, they send out the utilities will send out a newsletter, compare your building to other people, and encourage you to save by participating in the programs or by doing behavioral changes to how you operate in your house. So, do a temperature setback on your thermostat, open windows in the morning. So behavioral changes. The multifamily programs are, there's kind of sub-programs that cover, individual incentives for upgrades as well as whole building solutions. And then the commercial programs, the energy solutions is whole building solutions, as well as operational improvements, which include strategic energy management. It includes building operator training, as well as other demand response improvements. There's a direct install program for small commercial buildings. And then finally, there's prescriptive and custom solutions for, individual equipment upgrades. And then the new programs are demand response and BD, and I'll go into that on the next slide. Sorry for all the the fine print here, but in designing these programs, we really got into various um, conditions. But I'll point out what's in bold is that for full displacement with cold climate air source heat pumps, we tried to set the highest incentive of 10,000 uh, per house, um, or 50% of the installation cost. We have adders for that. If there's reducting because the ducts are too small, there's a $2,000 incentive, and then there's a $2,000 incentive for decommissioning if the house was originally on delivered fuels. So we're really trying to encourage the delivered fuels customers to convert. New Jersey is about 7% on delivered fuels, unlike the New England states. So it's a smaller customer base, but we thought it was important to really incentivize the contractors to convert. There's a moderate income incentive of 12,000 for full displacement. So we really wanted to target that sector as well. And then everything else is lower incentives. The utilities really fought for a dual fuel replacement, so we did incentivize that but at a lower rate. And then there's a partial displacement air source heat pump, and you can see that as you know mini splits. So we have a $2,000 um, incentive for mini split systems. And then finally on the last one, the last row for gas ground source heat pumps, we used a per BTU incentive um, rather than a fixed incentive because we thought that the variable cost to put that many more boreholes or deeper boreholes, we wanted to be able to scale with that. So 4,000 per 10,000 BTUs is pretty generous on top of your IRA tax credits. So that's on there as well. All right. Next slide. The demand response pilots, I won't go into all the detail, but every utility in our state offers a direct load control, which is really just controlling a smart thermostat. So there's an enrollment incentive as well as an annual incentive if you stay on the program. And then the only other thing I'll point out is PSE&G offers a virtual power plant program, and that's $5,000 for per 8 kilowatt battery storage system. And then, of course, they'll control your battery storage system as a virtual power plant. So that's their pilot. And you'll see the budget is fairly small for this program, but we're hoping to grow it, and we're trying to coordinate it with other DER programs, battery storage, as well as solar. So that's an evolving space. All right. Next slide. I think that's um, one thing that's very generous in our programs is we have the utilities running the financing programs, and they're not allowed to be a bank, so they're all offering 0%. So that's resulted in a very generous program, at least through Try2. But we might be changing that for Try3. But at the moment, it's a very generous program on top of our incentives. Uh, so next slide. I think that's it. Yeah. Oh, Try3. We're already since Try2 is only 2.5 years, we're already in our planning phase for Try3. Some of the key points that we're looking to grow is we're trying to establish more upstream and midstream programs. We're trying to address affordability, especially given inflation and potentially some losses with the IRA programs. We're looking to create a one-stop shop with concierge services. So potentially, we'll be looking at solar storage and EV programs offered alongside our EE and DR programs. on a website. So you just look up the website, and anything behind the meter that you might be considering would be uh, offered within that website, as well as concierge services, which would be like a help desk, so you could speak to a person. Um, and we're also looking to evolve our Comfort Partners program, which is our low income program, to better incorporate health and safety as well as beneficial electrification, because right now it's primarily focused on weatherization. All right. And that's it, I think. That's the last slide. All right. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Phil. And I'll invite Tunde back on also as we fade into the Q&A section. So we just got really nice overviews of what's been happening in Maryland and New Jersey as they're evolving their energy efficiency programs. So now I will, and thank you, we're getting claps and applause from the audience. Now I'll transition into Q&A. I'll encourage anyone, if you have a Q&A question, please put it into the Q&A that you see on the side. And I'm going to start with my question, and then I will try to address the questions that have appeared, but encourage others to also add questions to the chat. But let's start with, so first, I'll flip this one to you first, Tunde, but my first one is, both states have utility implementers for their energy efficiency, and we've asked utilities to start to change their programs. And I'm curious, Phillip gave a little overview of the rebates, but Tunde, I'm curious, what were some of the biggest changes that you saw in the energy efficiency portfolios in Maryland?
Thank you, Erin. Yeah, so the Empire Maryland, like I discussed before, shifted from a purely energy efficiency focused um, programs to like a broader strategy incorporating both efficiency and decarbonization. And I would say this has led to significant changes. Two of the changes that come to mind would be, a stronger push. The first one will be a stronger push towards heat pumps, electric water heating, to replace those fossil fuel based systems. Another major change that has happened is with GHG targets, more programs now prioritize low-income households with deeper incentives and assistance for energy efficiency and electrification. Um, these also comes with challenges, as you because a lot of Maryland, there's a lot of customers are unfamiliar with electrification technologies or hesitant due to concerns about performance or affordability, or having those new technologies tested, on their communities. So that's a challenge, building customer acceptance and awareness is an important barrier that, we need to overcome. Another one will be there's a growing need for skilled labor, building that skilled labor in HVAC and electrification installations, and working to overcome that kind of barriers is critical to pushing these programs.
Yes, definitely. And I would even say that I think the consumer concerns you brought up and the workforce concerns are more universal than we would imagine between all the states. Phil, did you want to add any? Yeah, would you like to add what were some the biggest changes and some of the barriers you saw as the programs were designed?
Sure. Yeah, the biggest barrier is something Maryland has addressed, is going from kilowatt and therm targets to emissions targets. So because we're still, under the legislation where we have kilowatt and therm targets, uh, the utilities are not that they're not incentivized to electrify. So what we've seen already is, we just approved Tri 2, but we approved up to incentives. So we haven't seen the incentives for heat pumps at the max value. So even though we try to set a max value and get them to really make it generous, they have the option to offer, half of the max or any level. So we gave them that flexibility to kind of manage the budget through to the end, but we probably should have set a minimum. Um, Uh, and I think also because of the targets, they're happy to promote partial load heat pumps and retain the gas customers, especially, we have one large dual fuel utility. So they're happy to promote the partials and they're not incentivized to promote a full load displacement heat pump. So that's one of the challenges that
Yeah,
we
and
face. Yeah.
oh no, I was going to say thank you for also emphasizing that as I brought out the regional roundup and said no two states are the same. Even these two states we have on the call, Maryland has GHG emission goals passed through legislation that's then led to changes, whereas the BPU is more implementing building decarb programs, seeing where New Jersey is going, but still needing that legislative change or could
Yeah.
benefit from that legislative change.
Yeah, there
Mhm.
is a bill out there for a separate decarb program. So we'll see how that goes.
Fingers crossed. Okay, I'm gonna ask two of the in the weeds questions that are in the Q&A, but feel free to say pass if you need to. So the first question we have in the Q&A, are the Maryland energy savings, oh, this is based on fuel types and savings and it's here, so I'll preface that. Are the Maryland energy savings based on an efficient heat pump being installed over an inefficient heat pump or based on replacing a fossil fuel system? And if it is the latter, is there a conversion from therms to MMBTUs to get the megawatt hour savings? Tunde, are you able to answer that question? I'll acknowledge it's an evaluator question.
I can probably answer part of it.
Perfect.
So yeah, yes, the savings, you do get credit for the savings, whether you're changing from a less efficient heat pump to a more efficient one, or you're fuel switching from a fossil fuel-based system to um, a more efficient heat pump. So for both of them, you do get energy savings counted. Um, or rather GHG emissions, because that's the metric we use now. GHG reductions. I think that's the part of the question that I'll be able to answer.
Okay. We've done it. Well, now I've got a flip evaluator question for New Jersey too, before we move on to our next topic. For New Jersey incentives, are the BTU hours the cooling or heating BTU hours? And if heating, which temperature rating is being
Right.
used?
Oh,
You can
I
pass.
hadn't thought about it. It should be, yeah, full capacity, so that should be heating. Yeah, because that'll be larger. Yeah. What
Okay.
was the second part of the question?
If heating, which temperature rating is being used? Is it AHRI or manufacturer approved? You can tell we
Uh,
run program with
yeah.
heat pump manufacturer.
Yeah, it was not specified in our framework, so the utilities we let the utilities have the freedom to specify that, but we have not seen the that detail yet. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, great. So thank you. I'm gonna pivot back to my questions I had, and then I'll ask others. If anything's come up, please put them in the chat, but I'll be floating back and forth between the two. So next I have for you both is just a question about investments in natural gas infrastructure. I know this came up in the Maryland proceeding, and I was kind of wondering, Tunde, if you could give an overview of what's going on with Washington gas portfolio and the future of gas incentives, and then Phil, if there's anything similar in New Jersey. Tunde, I'll pass it to you first.
Sure, Erin. Yeah, so um, in Maryland, several stakeholders, including MEA, advocated for ending gas appliance incentives under the Empower program. Um, while the Public Service Commission denied this request at this time, it directed Washington Gas to submit alternative plans in its semi-annual reports that exclude gas appliance incentives. We think this indicates a willingness by the PSC to explore that possibility in the future. Um, also, in Washington's Gas most recent rate case concluded a year ago, it resulted in the PSC awarding only 26% of the requested amount and directing the company to consider non-pipeline alternatives in its next filing. Um, Columbia Gas also currently has a $11 million rate case pending before the PSC with a ruling expected in the coming weeks. Meanwhile, there hasn't been a decision on the future. You mentioned the future gas docket. There hasn't been a decision there yet. Um, on the legislative front, there's a key bill under consideration. That's the stride proposal, which takes a modest approach by focusing on better risk prioritization and cost-effective alternatives rather than broad expansion of gas infrastructure. So this signal that Maryland is increasingly moving towards the safe, cost-effective management of its gas infrastructure, while we work towards reducing the fossil fuel dependence for heating. I hope that answers the question.
No, that was great. Thank you for that overview. And yeah, I feel like gas, future of gas and also future of gas incentives, like everything has to happen kind of in a different environment, but all be moving towards the same goal of helping the gas system wind down or however the state's planning to see it in its future. So great overview and thank you for hitting all those different policy areas. Phil, any updates from New Jersey?
Not much. I think we did try to keep the gas furnace incentives low, but we allowed it to go. There was environmental advocates, fighting against any further gas incentives. I think in the end we let it go, but we also mentioned that in 2029 with the efficiency rules increasing to require condensing furnaces, we said we would revisit any furnace incentives in our next triennium. Yeah. So
Great, thank you.
hoping that efficiency rule for gas furnaces stays in place for 2029. Yeah.
Fingers crossed. Um, Excellent. Okay. Well, actually, yeah, we'll pop back over to New Jersey. For this one, this is a question from the chat. So for the one-stop shop services, do the utilities have oversight of all the programs they provide the information on, or would some be administered by the state? I guess, how are you envisioning the one-stop shop platform coming together and what kind of programs?
Yeah, that that's to be determined. I think there's pros and cons. The state wants to be able to generally run it and sell all the programs together, right? Because not all the programs are utility run per se. So just to make it kind of transparent that these services are all available for the customer. Uh, so the actual running of it and implementation, we haven't worked out the details yet. So.
Great. Thank you. No problem. And for our next question, I think I'm going to pop over to workforce and contractor education because I think we both mentioned that this is kind of a gap we're seeing. So we all know that the contractor base is another key partner in this transition. So I'm curious, from what I've seen, the energy efficiency portfolios haven't adopted kind of a statewide contractor network yet, but I'm curious if your offices are hoping to see one or what you're envisioning for your state in this area. And I'll leave it open to whoever wants to maybe kick us off.
I guess I can go.
Oh, you're off
Yeah,
mute.
yeah, I'm off mute. Um, yeah, we substantially increased the budget for the utility run workforce development. So I think it was like $2 million to I think 20 million. So there's going to be utility led workforce development. We have a building and industrial leadership team that was a federal grant. So that's bringing together community based organizations with training centers, with businesses to figure out what are the training priorities. And then also in our energy master plan, it called out for a clean buildings hub, which is really, it'd be a website that offers all these services, training, events, and then also just networking opportunities to bring together jobs anywhere from job seekers to manufacturers and everybody in between to kind of bring together kind of electrification skills. So, yeah.
Can I go?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Okay. On our end, we recognize that workforce and contractor education is essential for the successful adoption of heat pumps and, for building electrification. MEA runs a program called the Energy Efficiency Equity Grant Program. As part of that program, a portion of the funding may be used for training costs for energy efficiency workers involved in projects that benefit low and moderate income Maryland residents. In addition, MEA collaborates or is collaborating with the Department of Labor to expand workforce training programs that supports the installation of heat pumps, ensuring that there's a skilled labor force to support and Maryland's clean energy transition.
Great, thank you. So it sounds more of a cross-agency collaboration in Maryland and then cross-utilities in New Jersey, which is exciting to hear. Okay, we will go to the question in the chat or in the Q&A for this next one. So you both mentioned, or we all have mentioned, that most policies are implemented at the state level. Are there any kind of regional policies you would recommend or regional policies you would like to see? And while you're thinking, I'll highlight the one that you both participate in, which is the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which caps emissions. But maybe in the building space, any policies that you think would be good for the Mid-Atlantic region to see?
I'll say I'm jealous of what's happening in New England with what is it called? The heat pump
It's the New
accelerator?
England,
Yeah.
New England Heat Pump Accelerator, Phil.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I wish we had something similar here. What Pennsylvania, New York, I don't know. And Maryland, I assume, especially, yeah, given the change in legislation with Empower. So yeah, that's the one thing I'd love to see here.
Tunde?
Yeah, you stole my thunder there, so I don't have any other one to add. Yeah.
No problem. I'll also plant the seed Mid-Atlantic Contractor Network and training resources. Think about. Um, Great. With that, I have one final summary question that I've prepped to finish us out. But I'm just curious if you both kind of explain until you had a slide on this a little bit, but maybe pick your favorite. What are you looking forward to tackling in your states in the next cycle of programs? What do you kind of see as the next big transition or shift for the energy efficiency programs? And Tunde, can I pass it to you?
Well, um, 2025 is the first year that we're changing from this, the program over the last decade plus has been focused on energy efficiency. So we are actually making a big shift towards, greenhouse gas emissions and electrification. So it's a big shift. It's a period of learning as well for us. So we hope to take that lessons forward to be able to maybe push for more aggressive in the future and um, um, more aggressive programs that would reach um, Marylanders. For me, one of the things I would like to see from the Empower Maryland program is a lot more benefit for the low-income Marylanders. I think historically the program hasn't reached as many low-income Marylanders as it has the potential to. We think that it's important that because everyone pays into the program, it's important that we are able to reach those that are most vulnerable in our society and try to ensure that they enjoy the benefits of the program. So what I would want to see going forward, that's one of the things I would really want to see that we are able to reach more of the underserved and vulnerable communities in Maryland with that program.
Great, thank you. Phil?
Yeah, Tunde, I'm glad you mentioned low income. Yeah, our budget for our Comfort Partners program and our moderate income program is maybe only 10% of the overall budget for our Trinium too. So I think we need to scrutinize that more and make sure we provide enough attention and budget toward the low income programs. Um, the other thing I'll mention is that, it is inspiring that Maryland did switch to greenhouse gas, and that would be a game changer for us. And I'd love to. I'm going to follow what's happening in Maryland to see how that transition happens. And we are trying to advocate to do that. The board has to work with the legislative offices to see that come to fruition. And then I guess the third thing I'd like to point out, and hopefully we can address, is to get heat pump rates out there, especially given the capacity market prices that PJM now has. Where New Jersey's going to have a 20% increase in rates, electric rates this summer, so that makes it much harder to get people to switch over to heat pumps. So I am working on a rate case now with Atlantic City Electric, looking at setting up a heat pump rate. And hopefully, as we go through all our base rate cases, we will introduce a heat pump rate with all our utilities. So, all right.
It's
Thank you.
exciting. Yeah, no, great. Thank you for that, Phil. Very exciting to hear. And thank you both for that feedback and your participation today. This was so great to hear what's happening in New Jersey and in Maryland and compare, contrast, and then maybe also both of you can go away with some lessons learned from a fellow state. So thank you both so much. And with that, we will transition to closing out the webinar. So I'll ask for the final slide to get brought up. Excellent. Again, thank you, Phil and Tunde, for an amazing conversation and presentations on all the great things happening in your energy efficiency portfolios. We just wanted to highlight before we close out today that we have two events coming up in the NEEP region. One is our Decarbonizing Communities event, which will be a specific community-based NEEP event that we put, and this will be the second occurrence of it, so we're very excited about it. It will be happening April 9th, 2025 in Providence, Rhode Island. And then just last week, we announced that the NEEP Summit will be in Boston. We're really excited to come home and host our conference in Boston, Massachusetts from June 10th to the 12th. And with that, thank you all so much for coming to our webinar. Please check out the Regional Roundup and continue to watch what's happening in New Jersey and Maryland with all the exciting efficiency and climate change policies being advanced. Thank you all.